The morning the most feared man in the city walked into the back of courtroom 3 of the small civil court on Velland Street. The only person who knew him by sight was the file clerk on the corridor bench, and the file clerk did not look up. Mr. Domnew had worked the Velland Street legal aid office since before it had carpet, since before it had a copier, since before young attorneys came in with the kind of suits that had to last 3 winters. He sat on his bench every morning with a brown folder of affidavits to file, and he watched the corridor, and he did not look up at men who did not wish to be looked at. He heard the door to the courtroom ease open behind the late comers, and he heard it close almost without a sound, and he knew by the hush of the bailiff that someone of weight had stepped in. He did not turn his head, he only listened. Inside the courtroom, the senior counsel for the Stragori family, old Avocado Brevin, dark-suited, dark-tied, his silver hair brushed flat, was already on his feet, smoothing the front of a thick brief he had clearly prepared as if for a higher court. The motion before Judge Velland that morning was a quiet one. Avocado Brevin, on behalf of the Stragori estate, had filed to vacate the pension trust of one Mr. Ottavi, who had served as butler at the family's hunting lodge in the Northern Hills for 41 years, and who was now 92, and lived in a small ground-floor flat above his grandson's bakery. The motion was tidy. The motion said that the original trust language of 1962 was outdated, that the modern definition of household servant of long tenure no longer covered Mr. Ottavi's exact role, and that the trust fund's modest, but the old man's whole income should revert to the Stragori general account. It was, as the senior counsel put it, a quiet cleanup, Your Honor. A matter of paper. At the legal aid table alone, in a navy suit she had bought 3 winters ago and a modest cardigan she had folded over the back of her chair, sat Rosella Mavrin. She was 26. She had been a licensed attorney for 3 years. She had taken the case pro bono at Mr. Ottavi's grandson's request the week the motion landed, and she had read the 1962 trust deed every night for 9 nights, including the schedules, including the side letter, including the small clause on the second page of Schedule B that nobody bothers to read. She did not have a thick brief. She had 3 thin manila folders, an old hardbound case reporter she had borrowed from the law school library on a renewable card, and a yellow legal pad. When Judge Velland nodded to her, she stood. She did not raise her voice. Your Honor, she said, I will be brief. Counsel for the estate has cited a modern definition. The modern definition does not, by statute, govern this trust. I will show the court the controlling case. May I approach? From the corridor, Mr. Domnew could not see her, but he heard her, and he heard the soft, small sound of her shoes on the courtroom floor as she crossed to the bench. He knew that sound. He had heard it for 3 years now, since the morning she had first come to interview at the Velland Street office in a coat she had clearly borrowed from her mother. He had told the office director that afternoon, hire her, she listens. The director had hired her. And every morning since, Mr. Domnew had watched her come in at 20 to 9 and put her bag down on the same hook and pour herself a paper cup of the free coffee the office kept on the landing for whoever needed it. In the courtroom, she opened the case reporter. She read 4 lines aloud in a steady voice, neither soft nor loud. She named the controlling case by its proper citation. She named the year of the decision. She named the paragraph. She set the open volume on the bench. She returned to her table. Avocado Brevin smiled, a thin, careful smile, and rose to answer. He spoke for 11 minutes. He used the words asterisk outdated and modern asterisk and clean ledger and asterisk reasonable revision. He suggested that the legal aid attorney was, of course, very thorough indeed, but perhaps unfamiliar with the practicalities of estate management at the scale of the Stragori family. She did not flinch, she did not look at him, she looked at the judge. When her turn came again, she did not answer the patronizing remark. She said, Your Honor, on the controlling case, counsel has not addressed paragraph 14. Paragraph 14 specifies that the definition of household servant of long tenure for the purposes of a trust executed before 1971 is governed by the language of the original instrument, not by any later statutory amendment. The original instrument is in the record. It defines Mr. Ottavi precisely. I respectfully request that the motion be denied. Judge Velland read paragraph 14 for himself. He read the original trust language for himself. He set both volumes side by side. He took 20 seconds. He looked up. Motion denied, Judge Velland said. Counsel for the estate, you will not refile this matter without leave of the court. Mr. Ottavi's pension stands. It had taken her 28 minutes from the moment she had stood. In the corridor, Mr. Domnew kept his eyes on his folder. He heard the courtroom door open. He heard Avocado Brevin come out first, alone, and stand for a long second adjusting the front of his coat. He heard the soft, small sound of Rosella's shoes. He heard her come out behind the senior counsel, and he heard her stop at the bulletin board to pin up the pro bono docket sheet for the next morning, because that was her week to do it. He heard Avocado Brevin turn. "Miss Mavron," the senior counsel said, in a voice meant to carry. She turned, "Sir." "You have," Avocado Brevin said, with the slow weight of a man who had practiced the line on the marble, "made a powerful enemy this morning." The corridor went very quiet. Mr. Domnew did not lift his head. Rosella Mavron did not raise her voice. She did not step closer. She tucked the case reporter under her arm. She said plainly, "If you mean your client, sir, I made him no enemy. He has lost nothing he was owed. If you mean yourself, I am paid, and not very much, to make enemies of lawyers who file motions that do not deserve to be filed. Good morning." 6 paces behind Avocado Brevin, in the alcove by the brass mail chute, a tall man in a charcoal 3-piece suit was standing very still. He had been standing there since before the courtroom door opened. He had heard every word. He had not interrupted. Mr. Domnew, who in 41 years of corridor benches had learned to know a powerful man by the angle of his stillness, did not lift his head, but he saw, from the corner of his eye, the tall man's shoulders ease by the smallest measure, the way a man's shoulders ease when something he has been afraid he might have to be ashamed of has instead been said for him. Avocado Brevin opened his mouth, then closed it. He inclined his head a precise inch. He walked away down the marble, and his footsteps were quick. Rosella did not watch him go. She turned the other way, toward the small landing at the head of the public stairs where the legal aid office kept its free coffee table, a folding card table with a kettle that whistled, a tin of supermarket grounds, a stack of paper cups, and a hand-lettered sign that read in Mr. Domnew's own careful hand, "No one who comes to this door pays for coffee." She crossed to the table. She poured a paper cup. She held it in both hands and breathed the steam. The tall man in the charcoal suit stepped out of the alcove and crossed to the landing. He did not hurry. He stopped a polite 3 paces from the table, and he waited until she looked up. "Miss Mavron," he said, "my name is Renato Stragori." She regarded him with the same level, unfrightened eyes she had given the bench. She was, Mr. Domnew noticed, taking note of him, not who he was, which she clearly knew, but how he stood. She was reading him as a witness reads a witness. "Mr. Stragori," she said, and she did not flinch and she did not flatter, "I had no idea you were in the room." "I came," he said, "because I was told my lawyer had filed something I would not have filed. I wanted to see what he intended to do with my name on it." He paused. "I would like to thank you for telling him the truth in front of me. That is not a thing many people do." She lifted the kettle and looked at him. "Will you have one?" she said. "It is not very good coffee. The office buys the cheap one, but it is hot." He looked at the kettle. He looked at the second paper cup she was already setting upright. He said, "Yes, thank you." She poured. She handed him the paper cup with both hands, the way she had been taught at her grandmother's kitchen, the way she handed everything she gave to anyone, a folder, a pen, a cup, as though it were worth the small care. He took the cup. He drank. He did not pretend it was anything other than what it was. "Miss Mavron," he said, after a moment, "the legal aid office surely has a policy on what to do when somebody like me wishes to return a kindness." She set the kettle down. She did not smile, but the corner of her mouth moved a little. "The policy is, sir," she said, "that you do not owe anything. The policy is that you do better next time. That is the whole policy." He was quiet for a long second. Mr. Domnew, watching the angle of his shoulders, saw the second small ease, the ease of a man who has just heard a sentence he will think about for a long time. "Thank you," Renato Stragori said. "I will remember it." He drank the rest of the coffee. He folded the empty cup down on its rim, neatly, the way a careful man folds a napkin, and he carried it 3 paces to the small steel bin beside the bulletin board and dropped it in himself. He did not look around for anyone to do it for him. He nodded once to Rosella from across the landing, and he went down the public stairs. Mr. Domnew, on his corridor bench, did not lift his head, but he allowed himself at last to smile. That same afternoon, in a wood-paneled office 12 blocks away, Renato Stragori shut the door behind Avocado Brevin and sat the old man down across from his desk. The conversation was not loud. The senior counsel had been the family's lawyer for 31 years, and he had served the father before this son, and he had filed many motions on his own initiative because that, he had explained to himself, was what a senior counsel did. Renato Stragori, in a voice that did not rise, asked him to walk through every quiet cleanup he had filed under the family's name in the last 5 years. There were 14 of them. They went through every one. By the end of the afternoon, Mr. Ottavi's pension had been not only restored, but adjusted upward to the cost of living figure the original 1962 instrument had quietly required, and which nobody had read in 20 years. A personal letter, signed by the head of the family, was hand-delivered the next morning to the small ground-floor flat above the grandson's bakery, asking Mr. Ottavi's pardon for the trouble and thanking him, by name, for the 41 years. Avvocato Brevin kept his job. He did not file any more quiet cleanups. He was, Mr. Domnew later heard from a court reporter who knew the office, a quieter man for it, and possibly, though Mr. Domnew would not have wagered on it, a better one. 2 weeks after the morning on Velland Street, an envelope arrived at the legal aid office addressed by hand to the office director. Inside was a discreet, considerable pro bono retainer offered by the Stragori family, funds earmarked specifically for the kind of cases the office took on for old butlers and small tenants and pensioners whose papers had been quietly cleaned up by men in better suits. The letter named no individual attorney. It made no condition. Rosella Mavrin read the letter twice. Then she walked down the corridor to Mr. Domnew's bench, and she sat down beside him for the first time in 3 years. "Mr. Domnew," she said, "I am going to draft conditions on this. Will you read them when I am done?" He nodded. He had by then been ready to be asked. She drafted 3 pages. The conditions were these. The funds would sit in an independent account administered by the legal aid office. The Stragori family would have no voice in case selection. The Stragori family would have no expectation of contact with the legal aid attorneys, individually or together. No attorney funded under this retainer would be required to attend a Stragori function, accept a Stragori favor, or take a Stragori call. The retainer could be terminated by the legal aid office at any time without cause, without return of the unused funds. And Rosella added the last clause last, after she had read it through once. Should the family ever again file a motion against a person the office represented, the retainer would be returned in full and the relationship would end the same day. She sent the conditions by registered post to Mr. Stragori's office. 3 days later the conditions came back, every page signed in a sharp, unhurried hand. No edits, no clause struck, no counteroffer. Beneath his signature in the same hand he had written one line, "I would not have signed these conditions a year ago. Thank you for writing them." Mr. Domnew, when Rosella showed him the signed pages, sat for a long second looking at that one line. "That," he said at last, "is a man who is learning." She folded the pages, she put them in a folder, she filed the folder herself. A month after that, Renato Stragori sent one invitation, on plain stationery, to the Velland Street office. A small evening coffee he wrote at the family's foundation rooms, 5 other lawyers, the family's senior philanthropy officer, no press, no announcement, no expectation. The legal aid office was welcome to send anyone or no one. Rosella read the invitation. She accepted for herself with a single line, "I will come." Mr. Domnew, who was on the bench that morning, watched her drop the reply in the corridor mail chute. He watched her go back to her desk. He watched her open the file on a new pensioner whose papers had just arrived, a retired groundsman in a different family entirely, with a different quiet cleanup coming for him. She did not look up. The evening of the coffee, Mr. Domnew did not go. He was not invited, and he would not have gone if he had been. But the next morning Rosella stopped at his bench on her way in. She did not sit. She only stood with her hand on the back of his bench, the way she might rest a hand on a doorframe. "He listened more than he spoke," she said. "He asked about the groundsman case. I told him it was none of his business. He said he knew. He carried his own cup back to the side table at the end." Mr. Domnew nodded. "Did he frighten you?" he said. "No, Mr. Domnew." "Did you frighten him?" She thought about it for a long second. She said, "I think I told him the truth, and I think he had not heard the truth from someone who did not want anything from him in a long time. I do not know if that frightens a man like that or steadies him. Both, perhaps." She straightened. She tapped the back of the bench twice with her knuckles, her morning signal that the day's work could begin, and she walked down the corridor to her desk. Mr. Domnew watched her go. He picked up his folder of affidavits. He noted without lifting his head the way the corridor felt, a little less like a place where men in better suits filed quiet cleanups, and a little more like a place where, on a Tuesday in late autumn, the most feared man in the city had carried his own paper cup 3 paces to the bin and dropped it in himself, because a young attorney in a 3-year-old Navy suit had told him without raising her voice that the policy was, "You do not owe anything, you do better next time." That was the whole policy, Mr. Domnew thought. That was, he thought, the whole of it.